Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of A Therapist, a Buddhist in You, brought to you by the Recovery Collective in Annapolis, Maryland. This is where we explore the depths of human experience through the lens of holistic well-being. We're your hosts, Luke and Zal, and today we bring you the topic that might be considered unconventional but holds profound wisdom: the mindfulness of death. In a world bustling with the noise of daily life, contemplating our mortality often takes a backseat. However, as we unravel the layers of this often overlooked aspect, we discover that mindfulness of death isn't a morbid exploration, but a tool that can enrich our lives in unexpected ways. Why is today's episode an important listen? The mindfulness of death isn't about dwelling on fear. It's an invitation to embrace the fullness of life. In this episode, we'll explore how this ancient practice, viewed through the lenses of both therapy and Theravada Buddhism, can offer a profound insights into the fragility of life and guide us towards living with intention and purpose. So before we dive in, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this podcast with others who might find value in these conversations. Our community is growing, and your support helps us continue to bring you meaningful content. Now let's unravel the mysteries of mindfulness of death together. Hey, Zal.
Hey, Luke. How's it going?
Doing good. And second episode of the new year of 2024. And this is a topic that you approached us with. So I'd love to kind of hear what spurred this. Why did you feel this would be a good topic for us this evening? The mindfulness of death.
Yeah, quite a heavy topic. I'm glad. Thanks for agreeing to do it. But I do pay attention to a lot of things that are happening in my life to bring a topic. And this has been coming up, especially if you are around recovery community. They say the longer you stay sober, the more funeral you end up going to. So that topic of death has been coming up. I lost a friend back in Burma on Christmas Day of 2022. So it was his anniversary. And then I found out about another friend's death one day after Christmas of 2023. So yeah, that's why I came up with this topic. But I think it will be therapeutic and also, but the title itself, it's kind of shocking, So I think it requires some disclaimer in terms of like that this is not, because it can probably have some negative connotation, mindfulness of death. But I think more gentle way will be mindfulness of impermanence or mindfulness of the uncertainty of life, something like that. But because if it's like in a technical sense, to practice mindfulness of death, it does require train, experience, guidance from a monk or somebody who's well qualified for that. So, but I just wanted to mention that we'll be approaching it from a layman point of view to appreciate life. So that's my idea.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. This is certainly a time of year and a season. Yes, we've gotten through a lot of this, major American holidays. It's often a good time, and we've had two recent episodes with looking at the past, and the previous week, the present and the future. But yeah, I mean, really looking at the fragility of life can really bring valuable insights. It's potentially leading to more looking or highlighting the importance of intention and purpose and things like that. So yeah, we'll see where we go with this topic, huh?
Yeah. And to provide a little bit of background, in a traditional sense, this comes from in Theravada meditation practice. There are 40 meditation objects, and one of them is death. And also traditionally, there are 4 protective meditations. One of them is mindfulness of death. The other ones are mindfulness of the qualities of the Buddha, mindfulness of loving kindness, and mindfulness of the 32 parts of the body, or the repulsive nature of the body. So these are supposed to keep us protected. So that's the tradition. Mindfulness of death is actually can create protection around us, according to the tradition.
So I think you're explaining how it aligns with, would you say, some of the Buddhist spiritual teachings? Is contemplating death a core practice in Buddhism?
It is part of the first foundation of mindfulness, which is the mindfulness of the body. And then there's a section about the 32 parts of the body, and then the mindfulness of death is part of that too. But I think it would be helpful to kind of unpack, because this will also help us understand what mindfulness actually means in a Buddhist sense, because it's not like thinking about death all day, oh yeah, I'm going to die. But it's more about mindfulness as in uh, bringing attention to the mind about the fact that death is certainly going to happen, and that death is part of life, and also when it's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and where it's going to happen is uncertain. It can happen anytime. So those are the factors of bringing mindfulness in terms of to create urgency, in terms of focusing on the action, wholesome, and to do wholesome deeds, and also avoid unwholesome deeds, to kind of motivate the practitioner. So that really is the purpose behind this practice.
I never thought I could listen to you talk about death all day. Tell us more. Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, without getting, I would like to start with on a personal note, because some of the people that I've lost, they do have children, and so it gets me emotional, but emotional in a way of like gratitude and also appreciation, that it just makes me live present, and it makes me live in the present today, because it can just go away. I can just go away, or they can just go away at any point. So I think that really is the essence and the beauty of, because we're in a way protected away from death, as if it will never happen, but not to sound negative, but like it definitely is going to happen, but it can have positive impact on how I look at today. That yeah, I can die at any point, which even makes the time that I do have with my children a lot more precious, today.
Yeah, I think you're right now sharing what our topic is: mindfulness of death. You're being mindful of hearing about someone, whether it's in your immediate or your intermediate core of your life. And how do we not look at, in some ways, if we're mindful, man, this individual had children, I have children. We begin to look at the fragility of our own life. And I think when I think of mindfulness of death in a therapeutic context, you as a life and recovery coach and me as a therapist, I think that's one thing that I try to help people do if this is where they're at in their life. If there's a death in their life and they bring it to me in session, it's how do I help them to be mindful of loss, of grief, exploring death and one's own thoughts and feelings about mortality for themselves or people they know. And I think this can be advantageous, just to be very mindful and aware of it, because in some way, and I say this almost every time, not so much for the other people I work with, but for me, as I'm being mindful of death when someone else is processing theirs, that I can't not think about one of my perspectives of death. It's sometimes I feel so surreal with it, yet it's the most real thing that there is. There's very few guarantees out there, and death is a guarantee. And being mindful and present with that, for me, whether it's me as a therapist helping someone else, or me being mindful of death in my life, whether it's my inevitable passing or people in my life, that it feels so surreal when my human body is trying to make sense of it. And I think it's for me a spiritual thing when I'm experiencing a loss or grief. And I think it feels so surreal to me because my human body is trying to understand something that might be spiritual, you know. But yeah, as my therapist said, is being helping others to be mindful of loss and grief is I think advantageous. It's embracing the reality of our impermanence or other people's impermanence. It can lead to a greater appreciation for our life for the people that have passed.
Yeah, that's true. And another aspect is also to live more purposefully and also intentionally. That's another personal note for me, is that this individual who passed away on the day after Christmas, I was at the meeting to find out about that, but also it's the same meeting where I met him last time, where he told me that he's been struggling. He's still not drinking, but struggling. So for me, like, who would have thought that that was my last interaction with him, you know?
Sure.
So it really makes me appreciate, or at least like, we never know, you know? So it makes the relationship and the interactions that we do have with people a lot more meaningful and intentional, you know?
Yeah.
What if this is the last interaction that I will have? We never know. So I'm going to make the best out of it, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a part of me that is trying to be mindful of your experience with the loss in your life, and how I, as a friend, a co-host, you know, a person that's on this life with you, and it, I think of I'm sorry for your loss, and I don't know if that's an American saying, but I think American culture in general sucks at grief and loss, and the mindfulness of um, death and impermanence in general. But how does the Buddhist culture really embrace death and loss?
Yeah, that's it's interesting, and it's good that you're pointing that out, because in the Buddhist cosmology, or in our belief system, there's this thing called samsara, which is the opposite, or the cycle of suffering that we're in, which is, you know, not nirvana, you know. So in that sense, I mean, it's cyclical, like unending, which also means that we go through different lives. So in a way, it's not really it's like a passing from one life to the next. It's not like the end in our culture. So I think some people even say it to the extent of that there hasn't been anybody we've never been. We've always been a father, a sister. We have gone through endless, infinite lifetime of different lives, you know. So in a way, it is a loss, but also like moving on in the Buddhist belief system, because there's a cyclical nature of life and death. It's not the end.
What about Buddha?
He's gone. He's never coming back. Yeah,
When's then the next Buddha will be the Buddha of
love. Yeah,
love. Good.
Maitreya.
Yeah. Sorry, a little bit tangent there.
Yeah,
Get
but
back.
I think we can talk about that, like the other aspect, because there are some facts, as I mentioned earlier, that we have to be mindful of when it comes to death, and specifically is that you know, the certainty of death, that is definitely going to happen, is part of life. That's one fact. And the other fact is that the cause of death is uncertain. It can be anywhere, it can be for any reason, and it can be anytime. That's the second fact. And then the third fact is that we have to leave everything behind: possessions, loved one, relationship. When the death arrives, everything's left behind. So those are the four facts, but also three facts. And then the fourth fact is actually the actual practice of living a life, you know, mindful or right living, is that the only thing that we're going to bring with is our action. Because in Buddhist philosophy, it's the chain of action and reaction that keeps us going. So, so it really emphasized on the need for the, you know, some people have said that, you know, there are some people who have lived a really good life and they're okay dying today, you know, because they've taken wholesome actions for their life and they're very proud of it, you know. So it creates that urgency that, oh, have I done things that I'm supposed to do, so it creates that urgency to aspire to that.
Yeah, I think those 4 things that you just shared with us can, if I put them on 2 polar opposites, for some it can give them peace, calmness, and acceptance. But maybe for some, if not a lot of our listeners, or just people in general, that can give people a lot of anxiety, right? Those, I don't think anything you said in a general way people would disagree with. They're statements that seem, relatively for sure and factual. But what would you tell the people? You, as a life coach, you help people with all forms of life events, death being one of them. What would you tell to the listener or a client of yours that, especially those first 3 examples you gave, that give them existential anxiety or fear? How would you help them with that?
Yeah, I don't really share this practice that much or at all in this culture, only if it's appropriate, But I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, the mindfulness of impermanence is a lot more prevalent and more approachable. That, okay, whatever you're feeling right now is going to pass, things are all impermanent. So
No.
that's
Let's
like
talk
a
about
milder
death.
version.
Let's talk about death, Zal. Come on, let's hit it. Let's hit it. It's true. Everything you're saying is true, but it can give a lot of people anxiety. It can give people fear. And I think when you talked about that 4th one, they can certainly be a motivator. Well, okay, let's find purpose and meaning, and let's, we've talked about, and in my therapist side, I've talked about like hierarchy of needs, and purpose and meaning is one of them, right? And whether it's, holy crap, I live my life, and what's my purpose, or midlife crisis, or I don't care what you want to call it, but oh my gosh, I've got a finite amount of time on this round rock, and that can give people anxiety, that death. So whether it's impermanent or actual death, how do we help them? I'll give the therapist perspective, you give the Buddhist perspective.
Yeah, I mean, putting the helpfulness as a priority is important, so that's also another aspect of Buddhism, that there is no promotion or there is no convincing. It's more of a verifiable truth. So there's no forcing of making somebody mindful of death, so it's just something that is, if it's fitting, so that's my approach to it, that if it's going to help a client, that's great. But if I get a sense that they're not ready to hear it, or there's no benefit in hearing that, we can just leave it that way, especially we've talked about this too, about like in the Eightfold Path, there's a need for the morality first before approaching anything else. So
Okay.
It's not like if I'm in a very unethical place where I've lied, killed, all these morality that I've broken, if I think about death, that's probably not a good idea. I might want to end my own life, something like that. So it needs to be in a particular state of mind or condition, or in a particular support to talk about it.
Yeah, so I think that's one way of saying, okay, if you're not in this mindset or this insight or higher part of self, or ready to explore this, then let's not trigger this. And that's kind of like a warning for the episode. But yeah, like we just previously talked about, that creating meaning in one's life, or living the morals that, whether it's society, more importantly, your own morals or values towards life, if you're doing so, then facing reality or mortality might be more palatable. If you're living the way you want to, then there might be more acceptance when there's a death in your life. This is not a black and white, statement, but there may be more acceptance or acceptance of impermanence when you're not lowering your own morals or values. We see that when it comes to addiction and relapse and behaviors, that if people keep or continue to break their own morals and values towards life, well, I'm not saying that they have suicidal ideation, but that guilt and shame can create a downward dark spiral. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for the people that might be in existential crisis, I'll give you my therapy perspective. I mean, there literally is a therapy style for that, and it's called existential therapy. Imagine that. there's a therapy style for that. So in the context of the way we're explaining it, the mindfulness of death, it can provide a unique lens for individuals to, in a safe way, explore their concerns and potentially find meaning in the face of mortality. I'll give you some philosophies or like perspectives of existential therapy. One is allowing yourself to actually explore the concerns. So in existential therapy, it really encourages individuals to explore these concerns, whether it's fear of death, whether it's freedom or lack thereof, isolation, and here's a big one for people, meaninglessness. Oh, right? When people feel hopeless or isolated or just no sense of purpose and feeling, well, what's, nihilistic or meaninglessness, by doing so through a safe environment, through therapy or Theravada Buddhist life coaching that you do, you can gain insight into their own values and their priorities by creating a safe place to explore these things. And it might not do a dark downward spiral down, it might actually do the opposite. It can be a safe place to explore this hierarchy of needs. Where is the value in creating meaning in one's life? Like you said at the beginning, the loss of people in our lives can make us see not just the fragility, but kind of spark something in us to go, man, I can't take this for granted. That's a big one. So yeah, existential therapy, those are just two tidbits of it and can really connect and grounding. Let's talk about grounding. It's nuanced when it comes to existential therapy, but in the context of that, we're associating helping individuals connect with their present experiences and foster self-awareness and engage with their lived reality. I like to call it the great reality. That when we can tap into not just the fear of things, but really fostering the growth and the actual beautiful self-awareness reality, it can lead to more meaning and purpose and growth. So existential anxiety and fear of death can be at minimal anxiety provoking, but there's therapeutic techniques to help people when they're going through this level of fear. And the word that popped in my mind is self-burden and doubt. What do you think, Zol?
Yeah, those are all very relevant, and it just makes me think about the kind of like extracting the essence out of all the practices is, maybe too much of a simplification, but like not to dilute the truth, to live away from delusion, to see the truth. So like death is the truth,
Yeah.
But at the same time, kind of navigating with the idea of paying attention. My approach to life and also with people that I work with is also that if the life is not difficult, I don't need to make it difficult. There's no need, but more about paying attention to what shows up. So if death is not showing up, I don't need to like go look for it, to create anxiety. But the way I look at it, as this topic came up, is that death has been coming up. So there is a reason for me, from my personal higher power point of view, that there's a message. So it's also, being mindful of what is showing up and then making a practice out of it instead of, well, I'm living a very happy life, but let me just think about death to make it difficult. It's not like that, but to see truth as it shows up.
Yeah, it's good. You gave us those 4 things in the beginning. Can you give us another perspective, whether it's anything in terms of Theravada Buddhism that whether it acknowledges or reinforces the things that you're sharing with us today?
Yeah, so there's also, I think it's more related to the 32 parts of the body. I think the term is atupa, which means corpse. So mindfulness of corpse is also related to mindfulness of death. So the practice itself is to visualize the death of my body and then visualizing the lifeless body. And that's part of the practice. But then you can even time speed it to like degeneration of the body, like being eaten by worms. Like it's very vivid and visual, but at the same time, it's supposed to, for me, like when I do that, it really creates the appreciation of the spirit. Because if I think about myself, a life, and then that visualization of the dead body, that's my destiny one day, but also it really pronounced the essence of the spirit, that, oh, there is some kind of spirit happening. It's more about the appreciation of life that way too. So that's also another practice in the tradition, to visualize the death, and then even to the point of like turning into a dust, much later.
It's funny, as an American, internally I think we're doing video for this one, like I might poker face when you're talking, right? But internally I might going, oh God, where's he going with this morbid, right? This morbid talk about his rotting flesh, right? But as you share the culture and the Buddhist spiritual belief behind this reality and this impermanence of living and death, wow, it's actually beautiful, and it's just so neat how different cultures and spiritual beliefs can have beautiful and mindful and different values of understanding and accepting and being with death and grief and loss and the mindfulness that comes with it. So didn't know where you're going with it at first, but I'm glad you shared it.
Yeah, I don't think people talk about it explicitly, but I think there is an underlying essence of that mindfulness of death in any kind of, ethical living or just philosophy in general. Is pretty much about the fact that, I don't know, like the essence of just being present, like death is definitely there. So, yes, also another personal thing is that I've always been afraid of the death of my parents. Like that's one of the biggest fear. But then it's still true that they're gonna die one day. But like how I think about it is so different now. So it's not that it will never happen. It will happen, and I will feel the feelings, and it won't be pleasant. But at the same time, I'm at a place where I accept it. So for me, that's like the growth from the place of fear that I don't want to think about it at all, to like, oh, I can think about it and that will happen one day, and I can deal with the feelings when that come.
Yeah, there's many times that I've worked with people and they've had this mindfulness of death and their family members, often their parents or their siblings, and it often leads to this fear of unfinished or relationships that aren't mended, or worried that they don't have better relationships with their siblings or parents, and often in our sessions the mindfulness of death leads to a mindfulness of living. And as you shared in the beginning, maybe a kickstart to make some changes in their life, so that way it doesn't lead to maybe unnecessary suffering for the time left that they have with their loved ones. And sometimes the It might be the fear of death or just the mindfulness that comes with inevitable death leads to changes in people's lives. And that's pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
What a topic.
What a topic. Yeah. Maybe we can explore more into the other aspect of it, without being too explicit. But this is very, very explicit.
Yeah. Yeah, this is good. Maybe we'll put some, I might put a warning on the episode notes. It wasn't too bad. Yeah, thanks for bringing up this topic, and we'll explore some other aspects of it, I'm sure, in the future. Yeah. Great. As we draw the curtain on today's exploration, we extend our deepest gratitude for joining us on this introspective journey. The mindfulness of death, viewed through the lens of this therapist and that Theravada Buddhist life and recovery coach, isn't about dwelling on endings. It's a powerful reminder to cherish each moment and live authentically. We hope the insights shared today resonate with you, sparking contemplation and inspiring intentional living. If you found value in our conversation, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more enlightening discussions, and share this wisdom with your community. Remember, growth is a collective journey, and we're grateful to have you as part of our collective community. Until next time, embrace the present, nurture your well-being, and may each day be a step towards a more mindful and purposeful existence. Stay well and stay mindful. My name is Luke.
This is all.
See you next time. Thanks.